Washington's transfer targets have emerged.
You are Locked On Huskies, your daily podcast on the Washington Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back into another edition of the Locked On Huskies podcast. I'm Roman Tomashoff. That's Lars Hansen. He's site editor with Athlon Sports is Inside the Huskies. I'm the site editor with Huskies Wire. Thank you for making this your first watch or first listen of the day, as we are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet and to get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Lars, got a really fun show coming at all the everydayers today, but just a quick reminder right off the bat, make sure you hit that subscribe button, like, comment, wherever you get this show. It all does really help us out a lot. And with all the bonus content that's going to be coming out with all these transfers that Washington's most likely to be getting over the next week, 2 weeks or so, you're going to make sure you're tuned in to the best possible place to get all the updates for that. And that's right here on Locked On Huskies, because Lars got a lot of recruiting, a lot of transfer stuff to get to today. Four-star quarterback Brady Smigiel from the 2026 class took an unofficial visit over the weekend. We're going to talk about the 3 defensive tackles that were on campus, but we got to start with some other transfer portal targets that Washington is either going to be hosting on visits or maybe already has. Is there anybody that comes to mind right off the top for you?
Yeah, so the one that's kind of really intriguing, and you kind of touched on it obviously with the insider program, is the receiver position. They are clearly looking at a receiver. Now, which one? Take your pick, because
there are like 3 or 4, yeah.
But they're 3 or 4 with different situations where you look at DT Sheffield, for example, out of North Texas, who got offered. Although he just tweeted out earlier on Sunday afternoon that decisions are coming, and he has not visited Washington yet. So as some of these guys start to plan out their visits, for next weekend, which Tulsa wide receiver, freshman American Athletic Conference Player of the Year. God, that's a tongue twister. Is visiting Washington on the 18th and 19th, so that's next Friday and Saturday. But the catch is he's also visiting USC, Ole Miss, Mississippi State, and his agent sent me a few other schools that I put up on Athlon Sports that I can't think of right now. But so he's got a handful of visits before that Washington one. So if they can make it to that visit, I think he would be a fantastic get, because if you look at, he would have, I think, 3 seasons of eligibility remaining. And it kind of just seems like they just want an extra body in that room. I would have thought they would have more or less gone for the veteran. Hey, let's get a 1-year rental sort of thing. But, for whatever reason, it seems like, hey, we're just going to kind of add one more for that sophomore class. Because if you look at it, it was Audric, it was Jason Robinson, it was Justice Williams. Audric was the only one that played out of that group. And of those 2, Justice came in with the injury, and we don't know where that situation stands. J-Rob obviously was Special Teams Player of the Year, or at the awards banquet that you had that story about. So all the pieces are there. But, you look at his production, and by the way, beat out Sheffield only played in 7 games for Tulsa this season. So one freshman of the year with only 7 games of game tape, which I think speaks to how good he is.
So I like where you're going with that. I actually took a little bit of a different approach, something I wrote about a little bit over on Huskies Wire. But as I put together a perfect transfer portal class, I actually did go after, one of the top flight veteran receivers, where it's just a name that I'm really interested in more than anything else, where it seems like they're really looking for a burner, somebody who can get downfield and stretch the defense a little bit, where they got a couple guys on the roster like that, but they want somebody with a little more experience in that role. And this isn't necessarily, that same kind of guy, but that experience, and that's J. Michael Sturdivant from UCLA. Also spent some time at Cal, where that's a name that I'm really interested in. Him and Nyzia Hunter from Cal as well, where a couple of guys, and J. Michael Sturdivant was at UCLA this past season, but a couple of guys in that same vein where it's, hey, they've been really productive at different points in their career. And I'm just really curious to see what that can look like moving forward. But Lars, speaking of production, we've talked about Josiah Trotter. There's another position that really, you and I have talked about this privately a little bit, and it's safety. Where are they going to take 1? Are they going to take 2? What's that going to look like? And there's one name that really came to mind, and that was Northern Arizona safety, Alex McLaughlin, where I had to look at his stats like 3 different times when I looked at him, where it's 16 pass breakups, 167 tackles, I think 7 or 8 interceptions over 2 seasons at Northern Arizona. And he's looking to make that jump. He's a freshman All-American there in 2023. And just the more I watch him, the more I say, this is that kind of guy where we talk about the youth movement. You talk about that at wide receiver, at safety, a guy with 2 years of eligibility remaining. where it looks like they're really interested in him. There are some rumors that he's going to end up showing up on a visit. And that's the kind of guy where you look at the production necessary in the back end after losing Cameron Fabiculanan, after losing Cameron Broussard. And that's the perfect guy to replace him right there.
No, I agree. I think it becomes, and this is not really a comment about McLaughlin. This is more or less the FCS, FBS jump conversation where do you want to go, because we've now seen two Arizona guys, two former Arizona Wildcats, I should be clear. I think one of them was Genesis Smith, and the other one, I forgot the other. Gunnar Maldonado, I know, is in the portal as well. I don't know if they've actually showed a ton of interest in him because he was actually, I believe, in the portal last year too. I think he was a guy that went in briefly and then decided to come back to Arizona. But the reason why I would like this take, as you mentioned, freshman All-American. So he's got plenty of years left. He doesn't have, this isn't just a 1-year rental where you got to hope that he can make that jump pretty quickly. I think, they've done enough in terms of getting those FCS guys to really start and or be in the rotation and make an impact. Where we saw the Sac State guys, Cam Broussard and Deshaun Lynch got some playing time. D'Angelo T.T. Lee at center, was basically your starter for the entire year. So it's not. I just want to be clear. It's not that I don't think that players can make that jump. It's just it has to be more calculated. And I think when you look at it, I mean, the schools that have already gone after him, I think that immediately checks the box. When you look at it, PFF had him for 14 total pressures, 86.6 defensive grade. You just look at it, and that seems like a guy you could just kind of ideally hope to plug and play. And especially at 6'2", 190, the size is ideal. Like that's exactly what you're looking for, especially because that free safety position, you've already got plenty of guys on the roster for that. You just need one more kind of experienced body to help bring along the Peyton Waters, the et ceteras of the world, who are going to significantly see time in 2025.
Right, and that's another thing about him where he's really versatile, where he's been able to play a little bit down in the nickel, where he'll come down and he'll do some different things like that. And that's something where, obviously we expect a different defensive coordinator at the helm next season. But one thing that it just seems that Washington has recruited with, no matter the who's going to be at the helm, is that defensive versatility, the ability to play different positions. And, we know Jordan Shaw is kind of cemented in that nickel role, but if you could have another guy in there who, can play a little bit of safety as well, that you don't need to take off the field in that same vein that, we expected Cameron Broussard to do. And he did very well at different points throughout the season, is just play a bunch of different roles. That's kind of the role that I would see for Alex McLaughlin. But Lars, is there anybody else that you're looking at that you just say, yeah, that guy is one of the top targets for Washington at this point in time outside of defensive tackle? Because we're going to get there in a minute.
Right. Well, so you mentioned Jeremiah Trotter. My question to you is, I guess,
Josiah Trotter.
Or Josiah Trotter. Yeah. What did I say? Jeremiah.
Yeah. Hey, right thought process, right family.
Well, I was going to say, I mean, neither of those two, neither of the Jeremiahs are eligible because they're both either in the NFL or retired. But with that being said, my question to you, it's more of a question to answer a question. Do they take two? Do you take one or two linebackers? Because I think that to me is the question. And then the reason why I say that is that who is that second linebacker? Where we saw Trotter come in this past weekend, he was the only true linebacker that let's be fair, that they had on campus this weekend. So what does that recruitment look like? And Robert Balla knows how to identify and find them. My curiosity is just going to be, again, okay, we could go through the portal right now and look at the linebacker position and say yes, no, yes, no, yes, no. But that's only us. It's like, what does the coaching staff envision from that position in the transfer portal? Where if they're going after a DB with all the depth they got, clearly the staff is not afraid to take those veteran guys. And the reason also kind of tying it in with Josiah Trotter, too many former NFL players with too many similar names here, is that he's a freshman of the year. He was a freshman of the year, so redshirt freshman. So he's got plenty of years left. Do you want one more kind of 1 year rental? Some of those, the UAB transfers, I swear there was a day, I think it was around Monday or Tuesday, where there was about 3 or 4 guys, like 3 or 4 dozen guys, it seemed like, that enter the portal at linebacker with a similar, 1 year left, had 120 plus tackles. Like, okay, which one of those guys do you want? It just seems like there seems to be one more in that kind of mold where they would take a linebacker. We just haven't seen that name emerge yet.
Yeah, I completely agree. I would certainly watch Jacob Manu, where just because of his familiarity with the coaching staff, I feel like that's something that's going to end up being really important for these guys. But that's something we're going to keep monitoring throughout the week because, Lars, we got to get to the defensive tackles that were on campus. right after a message from our good friends over at FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Monday Night Football coming up tonight. 2 games. I got 3 bets for you. Brock Bowers, over in catches. Whatever that number is, take the over. Rome Odunze, anytime touchdown. Love Rome. Want to see him get back in the end zone after 2 touchdowns last week. Justin Jefferson, anytime touchdown. Who doesn't love watching Justin Jefferson? Go check out those bets and so many more over on FanDuel. So, Lars, we saw 3 defensive tackles on campus this past weekend. One of them you and I have spent, it's a significant amount of time on. That's Jaray Bledsoe from Texas. We love his explosiveness, his upside as, former 4-star recruit. Simone Pepa, who was a freshman All-American in 2022 and AP All-Pac-12 first teamer that same year at Utah. We're going to get into him a little bit. And then there's Western Michigan transfer who's also from Iowa, played at Iowa in the 2023 season. That's Anterio Thompson. Which one of those guys do you want to start with?
So let's work the way up in a way.
Sure.
Let's start with Thompson, because that one to me, and I use this example to you off the record before we started the show, where it's almost like the reverse Max McCree, where he goes to a JUCO, then goes to Iowa, then goes to Western Michigan, and now is back in the portal for a 3rd time. So this would almost be the equivalent of if Max had started and then he goes transfer somewhere else and then transfers one more time. That basically is just to kind of lay the groundwork of where he's coming from. Because as you heard, it wasn't like he was a flame out of Iowa. It just, kind of,
they really liked him.
It was his first destination sort of thing after the JUCO ranks. And we've seen guys, from JUCO go to a school and be like, it didn't really, Justin Harrington, for example, where you go to a JUCO, then you go to a big P4 school, and it doesn't really work out. This wasn't the case in that regard. This was more of just, bodies and numbers. And then as a defensive lineman, you kind of want to get playing time. And so he goes to Western Michigan this past season. And I think, obviously the stats are what they are in terms of you kind of look at them and say, okay, they don't like jump off the page.
Well,
but my point is, I think it's the reason we talked about this on the show. You take the body and fill in the slots and let the production tell a different story at Washington versus read too much into the stats at his last school.
Right. There's one stat that I think is a tremendous indicator of the kind of player that he is. And that's his block punts, because he blocked 2 punts at Iowa in 2023. And it just shows off his explosiveness, his athleticism from the interior. And, you talk about working your way up, Lars. I really like where you're going with that, because that's something where with Anterio in this particular sense, he's somebody who has all the projectability to be exactly what Washington needs. And that's a rotational pass rusher where, he started every game at Western Michigan. That's not going to be the case at Washington, assuming under this conversation that he ends up going to Washington. That wouldn't be the case, but he's somebody who gives Washington the depth necessary, right? Where we certainly hope that Javon Parker and Armon Parker can be ready for the start of the season. Jedd Fisch seems very optimistic about that, but coming off their injuries and especially at their size, those are questions that are going to need to be answered on the field. And then, we're very optimistic about Bryce Butler, about Alinius Davis, but you need to make sure that you have those bodies around them. And, we talk about Logan Sagapolu, where he certainly improved over the course of the season. And I bring that up in this sense to say, when you talk about Anterio Thompson, he's that perfect kind of guy where you need somebody to fill in as a pass rusher and get 15, 20 snaps on, 2nd and long, 3rd and long, on obvious passing downs that can just get after the quarterback and provide explosiveness, that ability to collapse the pocket with a little bit of Big Ten experience under his belt. That's perfect. But that's not all you need. You also need somebody who can defend the run, eat space, take up 2 gaps, and at times maybe also get after the quarterback as well. And that's Simone Pepa from Utah.
Exactly. I was going to say, because as you were describing that, I'm like, man, the run eater, I think that Pepa's the run eater of those 2.
Yeah, he is.
Of those 2 guys. But that's kind of what we had said coming into this week, is you need to have both. This isn't a one or the other situation. And I think, as I wrote on Aspen Sports, Jedd, it's one thing to say it. It's Jedd can talk all he wants because you and I both know Jedd loves his Jeddisms and hey, we need to go get bigger, we need to go do this and that. Right. That's absolutely true. But it's also getting the correct bodies and getting the number of bodies. And so that's why I love this kind of trio that they brought in for the visits with Bledsoe, Pepa, and Thompson, because you look at it, it's like, okay, one, you could, even though Steve Belichick likely won't be the defensive coordinator, I'm only saying likely because, again, as we record this on the 15th, he still is employed under contract by Washington. So crazier things can happen, but just
the only reason we're saying it that way, right?
Right, but just to be clear, like for the time being, because what we saw from Belichick this past season was a kind of mix and match along the defensive line, where you would look at it and say sometimes there was a zero, sometimes you had Logan and Bandit, sometimes you had a kind of mixture of the two situations going on there. And I think this is one where you could easily just plug Logan and Pepa next to each other and still have somebody else on the edge, whether it be a Bledsoe playing a 3, whether it be, Parker playing, as a third defensive tackle. These are good problems to have because it's not an indictment of the current roster. It's just saying, well, knowing the Big Ten, seeing what we had to experience this season and just not expecting injuries, but just kind of playing it safe, you want to have as many bodies as possible. And that could lead, to Bryce Butler popping, as you mentioned. But having that size, whether you're 6'3", 340,
yeah,
my word, son. I'm neither one of those two. And I'm just like, yeah, sign me up. It's what I thought. It's what I thought Logan would be more so. But then, you think about the O-line, D-line switch. And it's like, okay, next year he should be in that MJR mold where, hey, now you had a whole year on defense to kind of figure this thing back out. And we're going to put some size next to you so you're not kind of getting taken advantage of and having the undersized guy, kind of take the fall for it, so to speak.
Right. And, I'm glad you mentioned MJ Ollie because that's something where we saw what he was in year 1, and then he did take a significant step forward in year 2, which was really nice to see. But when I think of Simone Pepa, I think of his 2022 season where, like I said, freshman All-American, AP All Pac-12 first team. He had four sacks that year, 6 tackles for loss. You look at his career numbers, that is the majority, if not all, in terms of his numbers in that department. But it feels like his role changed a little bit at Utah since then. He's somebody where you need that experience. And that's like I think about Tuligasanoa, where he wasn't always necessarily the best pass rusher Washington had, but he was somebody who was always really stout against the run, could collapse the pocket every once in a while. And this is exactly what you need in the Big Ten. You need these kinds of bodies. You need these kinds of guys that can do that and hold their ground where, this is the reference that I make because it's just always where my brain goes. When I think of great Washington defensive line play, I think of Vita Vea and Greg Gaines. And by no means am I comparing any of these players to Vita Vea and or Greg Gaines. But I just think about the way that those two guys played off each other and how hard it was for teams to run up the middle with those two guys on the field. And that's just what I think of in terms of a blueprint. And I think that Washington has the ability to recreate that sort of just pressure up front, and that just that stout ability is the best way to put it. With Simone Pepa and a Javon Parker or a Linnaeus Davis or somebody like that. And it's just I'm really interested to see where they go in that department because that leads us to Jaray Bledsoe, where we talked about him a little bit the other day, but I really wanted to dive into him because this is the kind of guy where you think about somebody who you watch his high school film, you watch the way he moves when he's on the field at Texas, and you say, yeah, if you get him more reps, he looks like the kind of guy that if you coach him up the right way, can be that true pocket disruptor. And he's got the SEC experience to be stout against the run as well. But if you're looking for somebody who can actually collapse the pocket in ways necessary to get your edge rushers one-on-one opportunities, I believe with the right amount of snaps and coaching, Jaray Bledsoe can be that guy.
And that's the key is I think just, this isn't necessarily an indictment. You can say, oh, hey, well, he couldn't cut it at Texas. It's like, how many guys have you seen not get the reps at a P5? We're talking like top 3 elite P5 school, and they go to some other school and end up just flourishing.
Right.
You give them 200, 300 snaps.
Right. And it's not even just that. I feel like we referenced this the other day as well. It's look at the bodies in front of him. We're Seahawks fans. Yeah. One of those bodies is on your defensive line right now as well.
Right, exactly. And then, but also then you go back, as you mentioned, 4-star wasn't just a 3-star. So that's like, there's clearly talent there. You just have to find a way to tap into it. And I think, there's certain schools where it's like, you just kind of play that role. And Washington is that school of, you know what, if you're a defensive lineman and like a top 100 recruit and you didn't, get a ton of snaps at your last school, we got the snaps for you here. And that's the whole point of NIL, is kind of you're leveling that playing field. So instead of having Georgia, Texas, all these guys stack up the talent, now you're able to kind of get some of those pieces and say, hey, you know what, let's bring them over here. Bring that pocket presence over here. Bring that, impact over here. Because you don't need a ton at Washington, but you do need some help in that department. And this trio plays perfectly off of each other because they can all three end up popping in their own way, all be a success. And you're not looking at it saying, oh, well, only one of the two tackles worked out. It's like, right. But if they're all three rotating and competing, which I fully expect that they will be if they end up at Washington, again, I have to caveat these with will end up with when they eventually commit and things like that. But with that being said, should these guys all end up at Washington, I could easily see all three working out in their own way. And by the way, you mentioned Thompson helping on special teams. That's another thing that could also kind of add some layers to this, where you're improving the overall talent of the roster and other areas impact as well.
And that I think that's the biggest thing, where I look at these three defensive tackles, and if they are the three guys that commit to Washington, I'd be more than happy with that personally, because I look at that and I say, yes, this is the rotation that you need, where you're not asking any of these guys to come in and be more than what they are. You're asking them to come in and bring their individual skill sets and tie it all together in a way that this team just frankly did not have in 2024 after Javon Parker got hurt. And that's the most important thing, is you need that depth. You need those extra pieces to be able to help out this roster. But Lars, speaking of extra things to help out this roster, we got to get into the 2026 class. Right after message from the College Football Playoff. It's that time of the year. The College Football Playoff is back with a newly expanded 12-team format. It's guaranteed to be bigger and better than ever, bringing you all the hard-hitting and high-flying excitement that you love. TNT Sports coverage of the College Football Playoff begins on December 21st, starting with the College Football Playoff kickoff show presented by AT&T at 11 a.m. Eastern, leading into our first match of the Southern Methodist University Mustangs battling the Penn State Nittany Lions at noon. Then the Clemson Tigers look to upset the Texas Longhorns in a showdown at 4 p.m. Eastern. Don't miss a moment of the action. Watch the College Football Playoff presented by Allstate live on TNT, True TV, TBS, and Max. Lars, Florida State quarterback Brady Smigiel, commit from the 2026 class. He visited Washington unofficially for a second time this weekend. This is really interesting for a couple of reasons. One of the top quarterbacks in the 2026 class, I believe is ranked number 5 by 247 Sports' composite right now. So really talented kid from Newbury Park, California. Hey, shout out. I'm in Los Angeles right now. But this is a guy who I was really intrigued by some of his early comments, where before he committed to Florida State, when he took his first visit to Washington, he said, I'm only going to visit schools that I really feel a deep connection with the coaching staff with. And this is one of those guys where if you're able to flip him from Florida State, this is already a really solid 2026 class. It's early, but you see the building blocks, obviously highlighted by Isun Tafa and Ansu Sanoe. But you bring a kid like Brady Smigiel, if you're able to flip him from Florida State, that's a huge win already.
Let's just kind of unpack a little bit of this, because as you mentioned, already committed to Florida State. 2-9, 2-10, 2-11.
Yeah.
How bad was how bad?
Very.
Yeah. Anyways, I'm not gonna. I don't want to bury him too much, but just that whole. Here we go. With that being said, you look at it and think, okay, he made that commitment, I believe, prior to the start of the season. So that you kind of add some context there. Like, okay, hadn't seen what Mike Norvell was going to do this season, and then you kind of just compare the two schools, and it's, you know what? Let's take a weekend trip back up to Seattle and kind of see what Jedd's cooking up there. By the way, on the weekend when you're bringing in official visitors in the transfer portal and trying to reload, so you can see Jedd thinking down the road and also still paying attention to the current situation. And if I'm Brady, I'm looking at that and saying, okay, look how quickly they already got DeMond in. By the time I get on campus, DeMond will be going into his senior year. Correct me if I'm wrong on that. That math seems to, or junior year.
No, junior year.
Junior, right. But the point being, when you look at that progression, if you're Brady as a top 5, let's just say 4-star, borderline 5-star top quarterback, why not come in that same situation, knowing how Jedd handled it with Will and DeMond, where, hey, DeMond was the freshman 4-star, but he still played all 12 games. And now, again, yes, it's a slightly different situation in terms of, I'm not saying, DeMond's going to go 6-6 his junior year. I'm not saying that. But I'm just saying, like, you've clearly seen Jedd was always going to play DeMond from the start. Now, how and when were varying degrees of, as we found out throughout the season. But clearly Jedd's not afraid to play quarterbacks early. And so I think if I look at Brady and say, you know what? Jimmy is his quarterback coach. Was it Arizona? Those two guys seem in lockstep. So that relationship and cohesion is going to be there. And I don't see Jimmy leaving anytime soon. I'll just be honest, because there's no reason to unless he gets a perfect situation. So with that being said, all the boxes are there for Washington to be checked. And then you look at what they did on the field. Okay, 6-6, 7-6. If you get the bowl win, and then next season moving into it, everything seems to be lining up, trending up with Washington, with Florida State's trending out. I think Brady can kind of see that, where it's like, ooh, let me take one more visit and kind of reassess the situation. Because here's the thing, taking this visit in December, he didn't have to do it. Like, there's nothing to gain from this other than, hey, you know what? I want to be around the staff a little bit more. And I think that kind of sends a trend of where his recruitment is going.
I certainly agree with you there. So I looked at this in a slightly different light. I really like everything you said there, but I looked at this from an overarching perspective of the 2026 class, where I think it's a really good sign for just the prospects that we're going to see Jedd shoot for, where, we saw this in 25, right? It didn't necessarily pay off every time. I think of Andrew Marsh, Donovan Olubade, LaDarian Clarity being another one, Anquan Fagans, where there are names you can rattle off and say, hey, this staff took a lot of big swings. Didn't necessarily pay off in the way that you hoped that it would. But I think we might see that tune switch in 2026. One, if we see the progression that you and I expect from this team. But two, I think now that recruits have been able to see what Jedd is actually going to be bringing to the table in terms of the on-field product at Washington with DeMond at the helm, things might look a little different. We talked about 5-star safety Braylon Womack and how he's expected to come up on an official visit. Something his mother confirmed with me after they took an unofficial for the game against USC in November, and they were blown away by Washington. I feel that's something we're going to start seeing a little bit more of, maybe not just on the West Coast either, where the more we look at where Washington is in terms of the Big Ten, we saw them come in, go 6-6, be right in the middle of the conference, but clearly trending in the right direction if you can figure out the trenches, where that's not an easy thing to figure out. Let's be very clear about that. But at the same time, you can look at it and you could say, hey, yeah, those things are all going in the right direction. Easton Tafa clearly sees that. Getting a 4-star offensive lineman is a great thing to see. And you start to get a couple of those guys in the building. It's that momentum factor that we continue to talk about in recruiting. And Brady is such a huge part of that, where if you're able to get that flip, you might start looking at, oh, hey, maybe Brandon Arrington, receiver in California that I really like. Maybe he sees that and says, oh, I know how good Brady is. I've seen him in 7-on-7 or whatever. Let me go check out Washington again. I know they were interested in me in the previous staff, where this is the class that I think we can really start seeing what Jedd, because we saw it in 25, but what Jedd and this coaching staff can really do on the recruiting trail, where you're kind of playing against, I don't want to say against yourself. You're kind of playing with a slightly stacked against you deck in terms of you haven't seen that on-field product at your new school just yet. But with this 26th class, all these guys are going to really be able to see, hey, yeah, I saw the scheme. I liked the way this looked or that looked. And now, sure, I'll take that official visit this summer. And especially if, this Washington's able to pull off this flip of Brady Smigiel.
Absolutely. Well, to kind of pair it together with that poker analogy you were driving at, this year was doing a blind hand, just kind of not even looking, just kind of, hey, I'm going to throw some chips in, we'll figure it out, because I know how good of a poker player I am. And we saw that. We saw the good and the bad from that.
Yeah.
Now you get to see what you got, what you got in the pot, everything you got to, now you're going to actually play a full hand. This is what we expected from Jedd. This is the full hand that we had kind of been hinting at, talking about throughout much of the 24 year and ever since Jedd got to Washington, which was, well, we know what it could look like. We know what the proof of concept is. Now you've seen that come to fruition in one stage, but now adding to that in 26, I think that's why, the offseason is going to be so important, all those sorts of things. But getting these guys on campus in the offseason, like coming up for a visit in Seattle in December is just like, you really got to want to come here. So like, and it's not like Fargo, North Dakota. I'm not saying that, but it's just like, would you rather go check out Texas, Georgia, Florida, Alabama, et cetera, all in the South, a little bit warmer, or would you rather come up to Seattle and kind of deal with, whatever winter situation we got going on up here? And I think it kind of shows Jedd's appeal is why we were so high on him getting the job. He knows how to sell. He knows how to recruit. He knows how to build it. He just needed the time to do it. And I think 2025, that 26 class in 2025 is going to be a real kind of fruit of labor proof as to why it's going to be validation is what I'm trying to say.
I think that's a great way to put it, because the more we look at some of the prospects that Washington is in on in this class, the more we say, okay, yeah, if this goes right or that goes right, that would all be really great in terms of the on-field product. But we look at what all could happen on the recruiting trail, and the 25 class is laying the foundation. But this 26 class could be the big jumpstart that we're looking for. And we've seen it pay off with a couple of really early commitments. And it seems like a lot of these guys are going to stick these things out. And I think about Easton Tafa, Ansu Sonoe, just the headliners of this class at this moment. Wasi Lalobi, obviously Terrence Sari, and there's some really good names committed. And it's just like, we can look back at this and let's call it July and say, yeah, that was a really solid starting point because you were able to, reel in a commitment from X player, Y player, whoever it is you might want to say that Washington is in on at this moment. And it's really interesting to see where this class could be going forward. Lars, as always, thank you so much for being here. Thank you all everydayers for tuning in. We really do appreciate your support. And thank you so much for making Locked On Huskies your first listen today. Now, for your second listen, check out the Locked On Big Ten podcast. Our guy, Craig Sheeman, puts the Big Ten first. When everyone else overlooks it, you can find Locked On Big Ten on YouTube or wherever else you listen to your podcast, which is also where you can find this podcast. So please make sure you subscribe wherever you get that, whether that's YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music. We're there. We're everywhere. We're updating the channel with new content every single day. So make sure you click that like button, click that little bell so you never miss when we post a new video. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, drop them right down below in the comment section. And if you're audio only, please give us a 5-star review, as it does help us out a lot. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll talk to you on Tuesday.